So thank you all for attending this inaugural event organised by the ECR network and the Faculty of Science, transitioning from academia to industry. So I'm Gary, I'm in physics. I'll be emceeing this event, obviously. Thanks to the panellists for agreeing to come here today and share their experiences. I can't wait to get into it. And thanks for your time, of course. I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land we are gathered today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Okay, great. Let's get into it. So we have a really stellar lineup today. So going first, we have Dr. Anna Phan. So she's presently at IBM Quantum as a quantum research and education developer. She has a PhD in experimental particle physics at the University of Melbourne. And in her rich and storied career, she's worked at LHCb and Atlas collaborations at CERN, and measuring particle properties and discovering new physics.
So this is my main slide. It just goes through sort of, we told we had 5 minutes to quickly introduce ourselves. So yeah, I did post my high school. I couldn't decide between sort of computer sciencey type stuff or science. So I did a double degree at the time in a Bachelor of Engineering and Software Engineering and in physics. And then at the end of that, I still couldn't decide really which one to do, so I chose the most computationally heavy physics I could find, which was at the time I thought at the time was particle physics. So I did a PhD and postdoc based at CERN, so in the LHCb and Atlas collaborations. So during my PhD and postdoc, I did data analysis to try to find new particles or to measure particle properties in very large collaborations. So lots of meetings at all different times of the day. And then after that, my partner was always in Melbourne while I was based in Geneva. So I made the decision to leave particle physics and move back to Melbourne and join IBM Research. So IBM Research was a really good combination of sort of computer sciencey type work, but for a different reason. So instead of doing data analysis and modeling for looking for new particles or understanding the particle interactions, it was all around modeling more physical things in the world with clients of IBM. So some of the research project examples I've got there are trying to model personal finance, so that was work for local banks, trying to model hail impact for insurance companies, looking at risk prediction for fires, as well as evacuation planning. So in about 2016, IBM released the IBM Quantum Experience. So this is a cloud service where anybody in the world can come and access IBM quantum computers, which are real, over in New York. And I was like, oh, physics again. And so I kind of was interested in joining that team, and that's what I do now. So I support the University of Melbourne in IBM Quantum. I do some research in quantum machine learning. I do education work in quantum computing. And later this year, I'll be working, helping teach the world about quantum in a Kisket summer school. So that is me. Wait, I have notes that I wanted to talk about. So in terms of advice, in terms of career advice, I wanted to really say that good programming skills are always an asset. I personally was interested in programming, but I think computing skills are such a really useful asset no matter where you end up. Okay, don't turn down opportunities for exposure. So you might not think that a talk that isn't really related to your research or an outreach type thing isn't that useful, but you might not know who you meet there or hear about you, and that is a way to get an opportunity. Okay, keep an updated CV, and be prepared to have a succinct answer to what are you working on. That's really difficult, but something in a couple of sentences is really useful. Okay, and now I'm going to quote the ex-IBM CEO about 3 learnings as she was leaving the company. So the first one, and the one that I try to embody, which I don't think I do well, but it's that growth and comfort never coexist. Right? So as you're doing things, if it's easy, you are not challenging yourself. And things which are difficult are ways that you can grow. Okay. Never let anybody define you. And the third one is work on something that matters. So I mentioned those 3 things because particularly the last one, right, that sounds very sciencey, that sounds very researchy. This is coming from a CEO of a large American corporation, right? That was one of her last pieces of advice for people in the company, was to work on something that, what was it again? That matters. So that, that's important whether you're working in academia or industry. I have 2 more slides. So I just wanted to flick these up if people are interested in looking at these. These come from the American, the American version of the Australian Institute for Physics. They do these statistics where they survey people who have come out of PhDs for physics as to what fields of employment they end up doing, as well as what skills they use in their positions. So they compare here positions in physics, engineering, computer science, and their sort of interpersonal and management skills versus their scientific and technical knowledge. So I can tell you, things like teamwork and technical writing and managing projects and public speaking are important, but these are, I think, I'm one person, these are results from surveys of, tens to hundreds of people. So if you're interested in looking at those, I would suggest you look up the website.
Thanks, Anna. Great. Okay, so our next presenter will be Dr. Oliver Hutt. So he did his PhD in 2005 at ANU under Professor Lou Mander. He's presently working at Boron Molecular, and he has a really interesting trajectory from there to here.
So I'm a New Zealander by birth, and did my BSc at Otago. But I guess I had the opportunity in 2000 to come across the summer scholarship program at the ANU, and then stayed on and did my honours there in 2000, PhD in 2005. And I guess I'm kind of the same. I didn't really have any career aspirations other than to know how to put molecules together. I was sort of fascinated about how to put chemical bonds together. So I did my PhD in really complex total synthesis of natural products. And that really burnt me because I couldn't really see any sort of industrial application from that. So my postdoc experience was more going into medicinal chemistry. So as I've gone through my career, I've gone from going esoteric, weird natural products that no one's ever going to use for any medicinal purpose through to more applied chemistry applications. And so that's probably a trend that I've gone through as I've moved towards industry. So everything's becoming more and more relevant, but that's been a very gradual process. And I guess as part of that, that really sort of got more into the business side of things and did my MBA in 2018. And that's just recognition of the fact that to get a lot of these chemical innovations or any sort of innovation into the market, you've got to begin to learn to speak a different language, right? So your language has to change a little bit because you're talking to different types of people who aren't necessarily domain experts. I probably can have more in common with a physicist and can speak closer to a physicist than I can to a lot of the business people that I speak to, right? So it's important that you need to learn different languages and apply those different languages in different settings. Okay, so that was all stuff that I paid for to do, what people paid me to do, right? And so my first job was at Fonterra in Te Rāpuru, New Zealand. This is one of the largest milk evaporation plants on the planet, and my father worked there for almost 40 years. And so I was 5 when I probably first went into that facility. And you can't do that anymore, but I used to work with Dad while he was changing the atomizer. I'd be playing with the lift or whatever. But from a very early age, really exposed to large industrial processes, right? I love large industrial processes, like building big things, I like making stuff. And that sort of, I guess, really set the foundation for what I'm interested in doing. I guess after my PhD, I had to think about how I was going to do that, right? So I got into medicinal chemistry and I worked with Gunda in the Midwest, and that was a really fantastic experience working in the School of Pharmacy. So then you're actually exposed to people who have worked at Pfizer, who have worked in large chemical companies, who've taken innovation from the bench through to tablets that people take, right? And there's a huge pathway that entails, and lots of different teams, lots of different skill sets, and things that you need to develop. I guess I came back to Australia in 2009. My partner's also a scientist. She's a assistant professor here at Monash, and so we've had this situation where both of us have had to juggle our careers, and we've taken it in turns, right? So I moved to Kansas for her because she had this role in Kansas, and we were like, okay, we'll go. And then she moved to Minnesota for me. So then when we came back, she got a role. It was my turn to move back, right? So that's how we've juggled that. We've taken it in turns, but I had a great experience at CSIRO for 10 years. First 5 years working in foundation research, and then moving into the management stream around 2014, and really that's when I went into that role around business management around those things. And so I really became more and more interested in going down that pathway and getting into the business side of things and transitioning to industry. And so I think this is my lessons, right? I think relationships are really important, right? For everything that happens in life, particularly after university. As you know, at university level, you've got to go to conferences, you've got to network, you've got to build those relationships, right? So you can get postdocs, you can get papers, you can get collaborations, you can get funding, all those types of things. If you're transitioning into industry, you've got to get to know people in industry, right? So different types of networking events, but you've got to get into those. And so I spent a lot of time before I left CSIRO basically going to lots of trade shows with other companies, right? So I went on trade shows with Boron Molecular. I was embedded with those companies. I tagged along and learned the language. And the languages that you have to speak are not just technical. You've got to be able to speak management, right? You've got to be able to speak legal stuff. You've got to do business development and marketing, right? And anyone here, and you see this a lot in high technology firms, even today, people will say, oh, IP, I don't care about that. That's the IP department's issue, right? If you think that way, you will always be held to other people controlling your technologies, right? If you can't speak business, if you can't speak IP, then you will always be held hostage to a whole bunch of people that know nothing about your technology, but try and apply all their different frameworks to it, right? So I really encourage you to be able to, if you really want to get your technologies out there, if you want to transition, you've got to be able to think in those terms so that you can manage and control your technologies or manage and control your career without someone saying, oh, I've got to talk to legal about that, right? It's not true. If you understand it, then you can dictate or influence the way that technology will go. Be deep and embedded, right? Get in there and talk to others. Signal that you're interested in industry. Signal that you want to do that. A lot of that type of stuff in industry isn't based on merit, right? A lot of it is based on whether you can work in a team. So relationships are important. So be deep and embedded, be consistent, and be regular in those engagements, and that will help you, identify things that work in the right way for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Oliver. Next panelist is Dr. Stephen Edwards. So he did a PhD at Monash University in the field of discrete optimization. I assume that's some form of math. And he's done a whole bunch of things, very maths sounding. So you worked for the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Wow, you got your hands on all our info. No, I'm just kidding. Would you like to come up here and tell us what you do? With that kind of weird introduction, you can.
One's actually in microdata security, so it's closer to hands on the data than probably comfortable. Hi, I'm Steve. I recently, 3 months full-time, 4 months full-time, 7 months part-time, started working for Groby Optimization. So this is my first sort of industry job full-time. So it's maybe different to some of the other panelists, but a bit of a fresh take on the move. Groby is an optimization solver. So it's essentially a piece of software that solves one specific math problem really well. Like a regular calculator, you put in the numbers and get an answer out. An an optimization solver, you put in, say, a problem that you want to solve, some variables that you want to maximize subject to some constraints. And there's some solvers that will take maybe a few weeks, some that will take a few days, and our kind of value proposition is that we're the fastest. And that's why we have customers like Google and Amazon and Apple and stuff who use our software, because it's just the amount of maths that goes into this to make it usable is incredible. I guess the difference between Gurobi and other companies that's interesting is that out of the 70 people that work there, about 30 have a PhD, including the 3 founders. So all 3 founders have a PhD in maths. The head of, the vice president of engineering is probably the biggest name in academia, Tobias Akteberg, the biggest name in academia in my field. So it's the line between academia and industry in my area is like very blurred. So yeah. So I guess there's a lot of people who have made the transition, and I guess it also leaves me in the position that I can transition back to academia if I want to. So I'm in the fortunate position where it's held up in Cyrus Butte, that you can kind of jump between the two. So my path specifically, so I did my Bachelor of Science and Engineering at Monash, then decided that I didn't intend to stay in academia and do a PhD, but I heard about this project that involves robots and optimization and like cancer detection, and it just sounded really cool, so I got involved with that. So I had an industry partner like a Biosystems who were just down the road, ended up doing an optimization problem. Loved it, like the supervisors were incredible. During that time, my partner moved to Canberra, so I applied, I just wrote to academics in Canberra and got a desk at Data 61 in Canberra. Which was really cool because when that finished, I got offered to create a new course there, or help create the content for a new optimization course. After that, I submitted my PhD, and after that, I just couldn't work. I just was burnt out. So I worked part-time for Australian Bureau of Statistics and while doing this ANU course. Then worked briefly as a postdoc at Melbourne Uni for a year last year. And then about in August, so 6 months into the pandemic, got an email from one of my PhD supervisors asking, saying that Gurobi were interested in hiring in Australia, and then did all the interview process then. So it wasn't like I was really looking, I was already in a postdoc, but I guess I just moved because it was sort of unsettled. I was on a fixed term contract, it was a bit unsettling, and I have been using Gurobi forever, and I cite the people that work there, I love them, so it was perfect timing for me. So I guess I was lucky in that respect. It's not like I made a conscious decision that I've been really trying to transition to an industry job for a while. So in terms of takeaways, for the pros and cons, just as I see it, the main difference is I love having small incremental tasks that I can tick off now. Like instead of these big existential research problems that I sit with for a year. I'm kind of been enjoying how small, like having a lot of little things, and through that, I guess I've been sleeping better than I've ever slept. Just because, yeah, no more big existential, what's my research problem, like what grant am I going to apply for, what's my next thing. So just having a bit more stability has been fantastic. Having a team of 30 PhDs has been amazing. So learning, I do one-on-one training with someone who did their PhD in something, and I can just drill them about exactly instead of trying to guess how these things work. I guess the downside is like I work for a small 60-person company that across all the time. Like the reason why I got hired was because I was in Australia, right? So the time zones, they didn't have anyone on this time zone, so it means that I have a lot of early mornings, late nights to communicate. So, which is all right. It's a bit of a pain, but now that I'm set up, it's less frequent. So I'll leave it with that and apologise for bringing a slide deck that I gave to customers a few weeks ago.
Thanks, Stephen. So our next panellist is Dr. Cam McRae. So he is a senior research engineer, so I'm looking at the right person this time. Yay, good job, Gary. You did a PhD at CSIRO in operations research?
So the interesting thing is I use Stephen's software every single day, and it's fantastic. The other interesting thing, actually, that's highly relevant is when his position came up, the company reached out to academics in Australia, they reached out to people in industry and said, who do you know? And it just so happened that you were the one that was known by most people. But that is one way in which you can definitely make the transition. All right, so I might be a little bit different, we'll find out. So I have a career in 3 acts. So I didn't go straight into academia, I actually worked. So in Act 1, I did a BSc in computer science here. And I'm aware that that dates me because there was no faculty of computing, there was no Bachelor of Computer Science, and that happens to be a long time ago. I then went and did a boring corporate job. And I took these big reel-to-reel tapes that came from a manufacturer, and I extracted data on them, and I copied that data onto small tapes and couried them out. And that was my first job, and it was not very exciting. But then I had an exciting job, and I joined a startup called carsales.com.au, which many of you have probably hunted for your car on. It was started by my good friend Greg. I was the 4th employee, and we went from a little corner office to a multi-billion-dollar company. It was very exciting, and I had a lot of jobs. Some of those jobs, you could sort of see a range. When you start an early-stage venture, you might be the programmer, but you're also making the coffee when people come to visit, etc., etc. I was also the ping-pong champion, but don't tell anyone. All right. So one of the things that happens when you have a little small business that becomes a big business is the business grows up around you. And there's a phrase in HR which is terrible, and don't work for a company that has this philosophy, but it's up or out. And if you're an early stage employee in a company that grows up around you, you are neither up nor out. You're not up because the investors have brought in their people to manage the thing, and you're not out because they're scared you know things. Right? This is a really bad situation to find yourself in. You're essentially in the corner of a room atrophying. So, cue existential crisis. All right, so I thought what is the next thing that's going to happen? I timed the web thing pretty well. Unfortunately, also timed the NASDAQ crash, but timed the web thing reasonably well. What's the next thing? It's going to be data and mathematics. So Act 2. So I did a Master's in Operations Research. For those who don't know, Operations Research is a branch of applied mathematics, loosely. And it was on multi-objective optimization, and I followed that up with a PhD in Operations Research. My supervisor was Andreas Ernst, who some of you might know. Anybody? Well, I know you know. He's not here today, but he's just down the way in, what is it, Rainforest Walk or something? Yeah. And afterwards I worked as a sessional academic, so it was sort of like a wandering academic. You go from university to university and you pick up a course casually, right? I taught statistics and simulation and optimization. But it's not a very well-paying gig, and it's not a gig that anybody really wants to do for a long time, despite what university administrators might think. So what am I going to do? I had to look overseas, and I got 2 jobs. I got one job at the CSIRO equivalent in Norway, and I got another job as a lecturer of computer science in Namibia. Now, Namibia is a country sort of above South Africa, below Angola. And that was pretty appealing to me because I thought, hey, here's my opportunity to save the world. Wait. The other appeal there was, and I think we've seen in one of the talks so far, is if you're partnered with an academic, it's really tricky. You either have to flip-flop between opportunities for each of you to be fair, or somebody has to give up, or, as what happened in our case, you both get a job at the same university. So that made the decision. Namibia, Norway, both start with N, let's go to Namibia. Now that was fantastic until it wasn't. And it turns out Africa is really hard. But I had a very, very good time and learned a lot of things. And one of those things I learned was I suck at lecturing. So another existential crisis, what am I going to do? I want to go back to industry. So I reached out to my network. Now the problem is, you can imagine each of these acts is a decade long. All right, so I've been out of industry for a decade. I reach out to my network, and what I get is, you're overqualified. You're going to hear that a lot. You've been out of the game too long. A decade is a long time. You're too academic. It's a terrible thing to hear. You're not academic enough. You will also get that. And then you'll be bored here. None of it really matters because it only takes one good opportunity and you just have to persevere through all of the things that people are going to tell you and you'll land your first role post-academia. So I ended up as a senior research engineer at Biari, where I use Gurobi. And we work on trains. We work with train timetabling, crewing, deciding how to structure your network, all sorts of optimization problems that are super interesting. And our little branch of Biari was acquired about 18 months ago by a company called Navis, and now I get to do trains and ships. So that's pretty cool. But it's a very, very similar job. So I actually have a research role. My role is to do pretty much what I would be doing if I was a research fellow in university, except there's no teaching. And it's fantastic. I've in a team of 4 PhDs. We just hired somebody who graduated from University of Newcastle 2 months ago with her PhD. And she graduated last year, and we hired her 2 months ago. And so there is opportunity for that sort of thing. So this is a little bit biographical, but your questions were awesome, and I have answers for all of them.
Wow, that's awesome. Thanks, Cam. Our next speaker, next panelist is Dr. Evelyn Meyer. She's an investment manager for HESTA, and she did a PhD in physics from Monash University. Looks like you've had a really interesting career and you've made that real switch, I guess, from academia to finance. We wait with bated breath. Thank you.
Right, so it's great to hear the stories here. I can relate to a lot of what I heard. I think I probably have the most exotic jump from academia to the industry because not only did I go to the industry, but I also completely changed career path. So I thought I wouldn't go through, my work resume because I've got way too many lines now. But I just wanted to say a few words about what I did as a PhD student and during my PhD work and how that relates to actually what I do now. So I was a PhD student here at Monash, and actually I was sitting across the road at the Australian synchrotron. So some of you might have gone there, some of you might just know it exists. But basically it's a facility with big particle accelerator, and you've got a bunch of scientists doing, scientific stuff there. But basically, I was sitting there for 3.5 years, and the funny thing was I was working on a project that had nothing to do with the Australian synchrotron. I was working on a machine that's actually located in Italy, and that was being commissioned at the time. And the idea of my PhD was to work out new ways to implement feedback systems and look into new sort of feedback systems for those machines that are getting very sophisticated, and to optimize electron beam parameters. And so currently I work for HESTA, which is a big super fund. So that sounds pretty boring, but you would be very surprised how sophisticated these financial entities actually are and how much work is being done in those places. So I do a different, a range of different things that goes from trading to working on portfolio optimization, and so that changes every day, really. So going back to how I thought about my career when I was a student, when I was doing my master's and also my PhD, I had this image of, that was my career path and I was going somewhere with it, but I didn't think too much about it. And surely I was on this road and I was getting my master's degree and my PhD, and things were going to unfold for me, and I was going somewhere with this. And perhaps I was going to do a postdoc in Italy rather than in the US, and I'm going to maybe make a right turn or left turn, but overall I'm going to end up somewhere I'm supposed to be. Well, the reality was a bit different, because when I got to the end of my PhD, like, a few of you around here, I had my crisis, thinking, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do with my life? I'm supposed to get a job, I'm nearly 30, I'm still, I've just finished my studies. And then I had different opportunities, doing different things, but I had no idea where that was going to lead me to. And I had to put a lot of thought into it. And I did start a postdoc, still thinking that's not what I wanted to do, but I had to do something. And one day, I went on the web, on Google, and I just Googled my skills. So I just put in, optimization, MATLAB job, what can I do? And I was quite surprised to see that a lot of financial places will hire people that have no financial knowledge whatsoever, but that have hard skills like coding, mathematical modeling, simulations, and so on. And so I was reading those ads and I was like, oh, that looks actually pretty interesting. I had no knowledge of the financial world whatsoever. I could barely keep track of when I had to pay off my credit card. So I think I got the day wrong for 2 years or something. But anyway, I was still suited to a job in finance somehow. So I still wasn't sure about that jump because, obviously it's a big change. Once you leave academia, it's hard to go back sometimes. Then you're not academic enough to go back, and you spend too much time outside the academic world, or you don't have the right experience and so on. So then I sort of felt like I'm going to jump off that cliff. So somehow I need a parachute, or I need something, or I need to at least know whether that's something I actually want to do. So I swore I would never study again. But next thing I knew, I was actually doing a postgrad degree in finance online as I was doing my postdoc. So that was kind of like my, my wingsuit. And then I decided to just, jump off the cliff and look for a job in finance. And I was very fortunate to land a job at a hedge fund in Sydney where I had a very good manager. And basically the environment I was working in Sydney was very similar to, a sort of academic research environment where you had the time to think properly, you had the time to model things properly, which is not very often the case in finance. And so that really helped my transition a lot. And so I have to say there's a few things I learned along the way, like everybody else in this room that's on the panel list. The first thing is when you're in academia is, you want to come up with the best algorithms. You want to get the best thinking, the best IP. You need to be the best technically. So that's all the IQ part of thing, and that's great. But in the industry, it's not enough to be successful. And I'll get to that point again later on. But that's actually very, very important because you're entering a world that is completely different. Because you're entering a world where you have people who come from, different walks of life. And they don't have a PhD necessarily, they're not academics, so they think very differently. Having a PhD also gives you the smart stamp. You would be very surprised when you walk into a room and you're the only person who's got a PhD. People think you know everything. But the good thing about this as well is that when you have an idea you want to bring forward and you want to propose something new, people will actually listen to you. It does have a way that you should not think it has a really important way. Transferable skills go a really, really long way. Like Anna said at the beginning, you'd be very surprised coding. If you can do coding and statistical modeling, it can get you a job in a lot of places, in a lot of different industries. So transferable skills is something that is very, very important. And people are just people. So that goes back to my first point where, people are different, but at the end of the day, we all have dreams, we all have hopes, we all have, fears and so on. And so working with people means, understanding people, understanding what motivates them. And that's part of, the emotional intelligence that you need to have to succeed in the industry when you work with people that come from really different backgrounds and different places with different experiences and expectations. So that's all I wanted to share.
Thanks, Evelyn. So the next panelist is Dr. Tema Caruthers-Taylor. So she did a PhD in soil science at Monash University, and her present role is in contaminated land consultancy and environmental earth sciences international. Rather than me stumbling over it, you can come in here and tell us all about what you do.
So I'm a little bit different. Math scares me, so don't just leave me alone. My background's more in enviro, I kind of wanted to go back Like I'm in industry for the last 2 and a bit years, so I'm relatively new on the panel spectrum. My high school, I thought I was an artist, I was a, politics person, and the main reason why I wanted to mention this was a lot of people, and I think a lot of our panel is showing this, is that you don't need to be this, technical guru right from the start, or, think about that right from the start. I believe, I came from Canberra, and we didn't have things like VCE where you're studying particular subjects right from at high school. So I was a bit more relaxed, and I was like, whatever, I know what I want. My gap year was very informative of who I am today, which is why I want to mention it. And I spent about a year being a Jillaroo, which is the female equivalent of a Jackaroo, on a Pilbara station in WA. And yeah, basically mustering on horseback, as you can see, and learnt how to work hard and fell in love with the environment, and particularly rocks up in those areas. And so in my undergrad, I didn't want to be a snooty, university student. I wanted to be outdoors and see things, real things, and have a real solid education, which is why I fell in love with geology and landscape science, and basically anything that I could get my hands on and understand the environment. That's what I did, and I prioritised more practicality, which at ANU is sometimes hard, than actual theory. So I then went on to do honours, mainly because there was an opportunity to go overseas and learn about a subject that I was quite interested in, which was acid sulfate soils. And even though I chose it because it was a nice flashy project with CSIRO, one advice before I continue would be, don't necessarily choose the subject, choose the people, because the people are going to make it a good experience. Even if it's a flashy subject, it can make it really difficult if you haven't got a good team around you. So I spent 3 months in Vietnam collecting soils and doing a different technique on looking at arsenic immobilization. And this is actually my field, my site. This is a rice paddy. It floods twice a year. Guess when it flooded? When I went and get samples. So my samples are actually on that boat with that woman, because we had to sample from a boat in the end because it was so flooded. And we couldn't rearrange it because we had to have permissions from Cambodia as well as Vietnam to be out there. So yeah, things change in the field, and I'm learning that even now in my job. So I spent 3 months just down here in Mekong Delta, and it was able to meet a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds, and that's part of the thing I really love about research in particular, is you do get to meet people with variety of backgrounds and where they come from, and I think that was already mentioned before, and you get that in industry a lot too, and relating to them can be really difficult but can also be really rewarding. So in my PhD, before my PhD I applied for all the jobs and it didn't quite fit in. I think a lot of you would have had that experience where you're either looking for a lot of jobs and you don't get, half the time you don't even get an answer back, and sometimes even more than half. So I was standing in lunch line at a soil science conference and I was chatting to a friend's lecturer, and he was talking about a PhD opportunity, and this is where networking comes in, because it's not the classic networking events at the networking time with the right people. Sometimes it can be just standing in lunchtime. So I ended up applying for a PhD at Monash. That's called the CAPMIN program. I think it's still going at the moment, but basically it's got an industry partner. It's more chemicals and plastics, but my area was kind of soil chemistry, so I sort of fit in there. And my industry partner was the Environment Protection Authority in Victoria. And I designed, experiments and research as you do as a PhD student, but I also did a lot of conferences, a lot of going overseas. My focus wasn't on producing papers, so I've only produced one paper from my PhD and continue to work on it, but it was never my focus to do that, so it was a bit of a different PhD program. And I got to go to a whole lot of different industry and academic networking events, which were really good. And I learned a lot about learning, so I did quite a lot of tutoring and spent that time getting experience in what I like and how I like stuff, and how I like to learn stuff. And I think that really helped in transitioning to academia, because even that development of self helped while I was interviewing for jobs and stuff. I tried as much as possible to network and engage, but I didn't ever feel like it was enough, and I'm not sure if that's familiar to you guys. So I just wanted to put that there for kind of like, I feel your pain. Before the end of my PhD, after I submitted, I was looking for jobs and ended up getting an interview with Environmental Earth Sciences, who I currently work for. Just as a bit of a background on the company, we have like 5 or 6 different branches, and the consultancy branch, which is what I'm working for, is just one of the different branches. And it's a medium to small company with 3 offices nationally. We've got one in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. So I resonate a lot with I think it was the previous speaker, speaker beforehand, about, being the coffee maker and the admin, and, I do everything from data management to report writing to helping out with getting office supplies, and, sometimes the post needs doing as well, or that sort of stuff. So it's one reason why I did like the job, because you get that holistic understanding, and it does help with building your understanding out for the other industry jobs. So one reason why I suited the job and they suited me was that it was originally a soil science-based company, and they have an emphasis on science and technical accuracy, and they're all very passionate about contaminated land and solving contaminated land issues. So I just wanted to give a little bit of advice like some other people have, and it should resonate a lot with what other people have said as well. Your colleagues, your tutors, your lecturers are your immediate network. Don't forget that. So the people that you're in who are in your undergrad, who are in your honours or masters, and your PhD, they're going to go off and do other things as well. So they're your network. Don't forget that, and don't. I think what you said about relationships also I want to bring up again, because it's not necessarily a factor of burn no bridges, but be a nice person. Going out of your way to help when you can, or support, can in the end, make a difference with a recommendation, or keeping someone in mind, or them keeping you in mind for an opportunity. So the other thing I kind of found useful during my PhD was to treat it almost like an internship. It doesn't mean that like some of your PhDs in your honours or your masters are quite specific. Doesn't mean that doesn't have transferable skills for an industry job. So even if you're enjoying the subject, you can still bear that in mind, that you've got transferable skills. I mean, we've talked about data management and teamwork and that sort of stuff being important for jobs. So having that in mind is really good. I think one thing that I found that I want to give advice to my past self was be authentic. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be there and spill all your personal secrets to everyone. But if a pathway doesn't suit you, a job doesn't suit you, then don't choose it. Do push yourself. We all need to push ourselves for growth. But it doesn't. If something is really not suiting you, then it's likely that the job, the industry people that you're working with, or the academic people you're working with are feeling that as well. So stay true to yourself, show your passion, and that can help a lot. Pick a company that suits you and you suit them. refusing a job because it doesn't suit you and it will end up being actually, painful in the long run, that's, worthwhile. Don't be too hard on yourself. It is difficult to do, transitioning and sometimes figuring this all out. And part of it's a bit about being in the right place at the right time, and you just need one opportunity, as was said before. And everyone has a very, very, very different path, and none are better than the rest. We all tend to compare ourselves with someone else, and that's inevitable, but please keep in mind that you are not lesser because your path is different.
Thank you, Tema. We have Dr. Lindsay Vivian, who's a plant ecologist at the Arthur Rylah Institute for Environmental Research. She did her PhD in fire ecology at ANU.
Thanks very much for having me. So I'm Lindsay. I'm a plant ecologist, and at the moment I mostly work in wetlands and floodplain ecosystems. So at the Arthur Rylah Institute, where I've been for about 2 years, it's an interesting place to work because it's kind of got elements of both industry and academia. It's a consultancy, so we bid for projects, we have clients, we have to work in quite strict budgets and all of that sort of thing, but we do have government funding as well. And as scientists, we are also encouraged to publish. So it's quite an interesting place to try and balance all those needs. So being here today is pretty cool for me because I did my undergrad at Monash many years ago. And so I've been thinking about my career path since doing my undergrad and my job now. And I thought it kind of looked something like this, kind of like all over the shop. So I've always had an interest in ecology, particularly just nature and the environment in general. But one of the big challenges I've found through my whole career is at least in my sort of subfield of science, so the ecological sciences, it's hard sometimes to get jobs at all, and there's not that many opportunities that are permanent and ongoing jobs. So my career has kind of looked like this. It's been stringing together short-term contract after short-term contract. So for example, I was an ecologist with the ACT government up in Canberra on 3 separate occasions, including halfway through my PhD. I did a postdoc at CSIRO up in Canberra as well, and that was really terrific. I'll talk about that in a second. I've worked in private consulting, both self-employed and with a company, and I think someone else mentioned crises of career and everything, and I certainly had one of those quite recently, but have been lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, which I think someone else mentioned as well, to get the job that I have at the moment. But yeah, as I said, a theme throughout the whole lot has been sort of applied ecology. And I first really got interested in that when I was still an undergrad, and I did a summer studentship thing up in Canberra with CSIRO, but it was that year in 2003 where there was the Canberra bushfires. So it was a pretty intense experience being up there, but in the aftermath I got quite interested in working sort of in land management, understanding plant responses to big disturbance events like fires and how we can better manage our environment. So that was my honours and my PhD work. One of the things I've come to learn in the ecological sciences is that projects and funding and jobs often go in cycles over time, so that's often to do with government priorities, but that also changes depending on whether we've had like a drought or a flood or a fire. So having some transferable skills across those sorts of areas really helped me. So my postdoc at CSIRO was right at the end of the drought, and there was a lot of interest in environmental water. And so I was kind of able to use my experience in studying plants and fire and moving that to plants and flooding, pretty similar. CSIRO was a great place to work. Similar to where I am now, it's a little bit of elements of both, like working with clients and doing really practical science. In this case, looking at ways to use environmental water more efficiently to manage wetlands and floodplains, but also using really rigorous science to do that. So there were a lot of opportunities to do things like glasshouse experiments on plants, doing really cool field studies out in our wetlands, and actually being able to publish out of all of that. But at the same time, working quite closely with land managers and water managers to get things done, basically. But like I said earlier, the postdoc came to an end, had a bit of a gap again, and have had sort of interchangeable jobs with government and consulting. And it's been a challenge, but really diverse projects that I've worked on. And in that sort of field, a lot of it is to do with sort of legislative requirements to do with different parts of the environment. So I've worked on projects such as developments like wind farms and roads and railway lines where there's been impacts on native vegetation, so there'll need to be impact assessment and that sort of thing. A lot of work on threatened habitats and threatened species, so things like writing management plans and doing required surveys and reporting. But one constant, which I know has been mentioned quite a few times throughout all of my positions, is working with people. And I think someone said right at the start, being able to talk in different languages. And for me, that's being able to talk to landholders, so like farmers who might have wetlands on their property, or clients, or people in business, and just building and keeping those relationships has been really, really important. So I think that's one of my big pieces of advice for all you guys. And then just to finish, I thought I would just mention that when you come to panels or come to events like this, and I went to events like this when I was an undergrad and in my PhD and postdoc as well, you hear from those of us who have managed to make a career in science or in closely related industries, either as an academic or otherwise. But there are other opportunities out there, and I thought I would just acknowledge that I've had lots of friends and colleagues along the way who have tried as well, but it's hard. Like sometimes it just doesn't work out, and there is a lot of luck involved. And plenty of people over the years that have moved into other different areas apart from science but are still doing really well. So there's lots of opportunities out there, and I think training and education in science and research and technology can set you up for anywhere that your career may wander and take you. So thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Natalie Gunn, who is presently at IBM Research. She did a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology at the University of Melbourne. Would you like to come up and tell us about your career?
I kept this title slide because I always use it when I'm overseas to make them jealous about our beaches, and I like it, so I kept it. So I always love coming to these events and hearing other people's stories, and it's all very inspirational to hear what you've all done, but very common threads underlying all of them. So what I thought I would do is just give you an overview for context, but then talk about the transitions that I've made and then the lessons learned. So this is like a big slide. I've got a horse on my slide as well. Not being a jillaroo, but I did a talk and the marketing team got wind of it, and I got a meeting in my calendar and they were asking me all these questions, and I had my colleague on the phone as well, and they were asking me questions, but they didn't look like they were getting the answers. So I messaged her, I said, it feels like I'm taking an exam I didn't know I was taking. And she's like, right. So on the call, she said, Natalie rides horses. What they wanted to do was to showcase individual researchers. They paid for some, I went and did this talk in California, and then I visited our lab in New York, and they paid for a horse to come to a park and a camera crew, which is the picture next to it, to film me riding a horse. So I'm like, this is why it's great to work for a large organisation. Anyway, so I did my PhD in the University of Melbourne in biochemistry and molecular biology, and it was really fun, had a great time, but I always knew that I did not want to be an academic. So I got the opportunity to work at IBM. This was the first transition that I'll talk about, but just to give an overview. I joined as a contractor and I joined our IBM research team. At the time, I thought it was a fantastic way to make the best use of my skills, but get my foot in the door. And that's exactly what it was, because you can see I've had a number of different roles in our research team. And just in the last 3 months, I've done the second of my career transitions, and it feels exactly like the first, which was really hard. So I did my PhD. When I think I was very lucky. We had a really great, fun team, and someone gave me some really good advice and said, join the postgraduate committee. I joined in my first year because I didn't have a lot of experiments ramping up. I had a lot of free time. So I thought, great. But by the end, my supervisor said, maybe give that away. So I did. But I did it for the first year, and it was great because I met people in the department. So we've talked a lot about networking. I don't know about you, but I find it really hard. What joining the committee did was give me a reason to talk to lots of different people. So I had to pick up the phone and call sponsors. I had to pick up lab heads and talk to them about, is your team coming to the retreat? I had to organise the retreat. And I also got to work with a number of different people on the committee. So this is this picture here. It gave me a reason to talk to people. And then from there, I had now all of a sudden this peer group throughout my PhD. And I knew who was just as much of a procrastinator as me. So when I was there late at night, I knew who was going to be there, so I could go upstairs and go and talk to them some more. So it built that sense of community. So when I was having a hard time, I had somewhere to go, which is not just in your PhD. I think you get that throughout your career, also in academia as well. I did demonstrating. I think you never understand a subject well until you have to teach it. So that was really fun. I also learned about people and how their personalities can be very different. I also did some overseas conference travel. So I had a wonderful time in my PhD. It was hard, but I knew I didn't want to be an academic. Now I wanted to talk about my first transition. I knew I didn't want to be in academia, and I will talk about this because I think it's important. It's been an important part of my career journey anyway. When I did my PhD, I never got a scholarship. So my supervisor paid for me out of his grants. So for the whole of my PhD, I felt completely like an imposter. You know, these people are going to find me out. I'm not that smart. I could never get a scholarship. And it was just something I carried with me the whole time, and probably for a few years after. And so at the time, I'm like, I don't want to be in academia. And I thought I wasn't good enough, because we have this idea of academia of being ivory tower, and if you're not in academia, you're a failure. And I mention this, not only I hear that as a PhD student, but I've heard that from people who have exited academia at all different levels, whether it's supervisory level or postgrad. I think it's a very common experience. And so I just wanted to say that I had that, and these were the reasons. But I realised many years later, it wasn't because I wasn't good enough. I actually wanted to broaden my horizons. The structure of an academic career was too structured for me. I wanted more breadth. So when I got the opportunity to come to IBM, I jumped at it. I got to IBM through my network. I also was told in my PhD, you should tell people that you're looking for a job, which is what I did. I walked into the lab one day and there was a postdoc, and she said, Natalie, I've got a friend, they're over at the Florey, they met some guy at IBM, you should go talk to him. So I did. They were just starting a new research lab. Anna and I started pretty closely together. We were in different teams. They needed my skills. I needed a job. It was a match made in heaven. So I got to stay in science. I had the financial security of working for a larger company, and I knew it would give me a foot in the door, which is exactly what it did. And I've had, as I said on that slide, I've had a wonderful time. I spent 9 years in our research division, and I had considered many different career paths. When I was a PhD student, one of those was sales, and at the time I thought, no, never going to do it. But I'm actually in the sales organisation now, and again, it's that breadth. It's all of IBM's different technology capabilities. I've got a biochemistry background, and now I'm working in a technology company, working to help people sell technology. That's my current role. It's pretty critical in a large organisation, helping enable people, but it comes back to the people skills. What do people need? What are people going to resonate with? I think we've talked about resonance a few times. But I had to make that transition. Even within a large company, I had to go back and I had to tell my network, I am looking for another job. This is what I'm looking for. People needed to know what I was looking for in order to give me the right opportunities. I wanted to be in a different, it's that breadth again. So I've now had this second transition. I've leveraged my network. It took me 12 months to make the move, by the way, from my research position into this enablement position. So the network is important, knowing what you're asking for, knowing what your skills and what your values are. I'm having a great time, but it's like events like this that make it even better. So the lessons learned. I talked about imposter syndrome. I was a manager at IBM, and I always felt, because I didn't have the same technical depth of the people I was managing, but I didn't need to. I needed to help them. And so that was a big lesson to learn. What I really only learned is that imposter syndrome, it costs you energy. It costs you energy to believe that you belong somewhere, when that energy would be better spent thinking about, where can I add value? Where can I contribute? What is my skill set? I think it's going to be lifelong learning for me, but it was pretty profound when someone said to me, look, this is really just costing you way too much energy. Communication's really important. A few people have mentioned it. Communication for common understanding. Communication for understanding diversity as well, diversity of thought. Super important. But the other things that help you do your job, adaptation, flexibility, resilience. People are people. So people are going to say things, they're not going to mean it. Another thing I've learned is believe that people have good intentions and you can get a long way. Being self-aware of your reactions to other people's, what they're saying and how you come across to others. Being honest and sharing. That's what the biochemistry taught me. You need to share. You need to be able to share equipment and not get angry if someone's stolen your time that you've booked. It's the same in your industry, in any job. So these are the basic skills that we all learn in a science background, PhD, and further jobs of academia. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. Okay, so I'll just ask one question and then we'll open it up for other questions. So I guess a lot of you have actually covered a lot of these questions in your talks. I guess I'm going to try and find a question that hasn't been covered. Okay, so I guess a question that I've certainly heard a lot, and I've myself asked this, is, and I'll just open this up to the panel, anyone can respond. Is there a right time for making the transition from academia to industry? And how many years after your PhD is it too late? Is there a point where you could go like, well, you've been in academia for this long, you might as well stay?
I guess there's not any right time, and I just wanted to point out that in my field, there's actually a lot of people who have worked in industry for quite a long time and then move into academia and go the other way, and then maybe either stay there or go back. So that was just one thing I wanted to point out, and often if you've worked in industry for a while, that gives you a good idea of where the research gaps are.
I don't think I think someone said, everyone has a different path, right? And I don't think it necessarily matters. It will crystallise in your mind, right? And it's usually either driven by financial requirements, right? This is like a reality. But I also want to say that I think universities are changing a little bit. This idea that you won't be able to go back to academia, just tacking onto the last panellists' comments. The universities are beginning to really value industry experience and industry perspectives. I think that whole landscape is changing a lot as well.
Kind of wanted to say it in my talk, but I forgot. But talking about a right time in industry, thinking about preparing for this talk, we have academia and then we have industry, and we use industry as a catch-all term for like everything else. And for me, it was really daunting to think, well, what industry means a lot of different things. What part of industry do I want to be in? We've got multiple industries represented here, and so I think that's the hard part. There's never going to be a right or wrong time, I don't think, and I've heard many different stories about people coming in and out of the two fields.
Yeah, it's not like a binary decision.
Yeah, and you can come in and out, and I think definitely universities, as you said, are recognising more and more the value of people coming in from industry and vice versa.
Yeah, just on that, I think over the last 25 or 30 years, universities have become more professional and more corporate. So the gap is not as big as it once was. And so I wouldn't necessarily be so concerned about how long it took you. As well as that, we've got a lot of linkage grants and that sort of thing happening now. And you know, if you're on a linkage grant, yes, you're in academia, but you're also in industry, effectively, right? So I wouldn't be super worried about that.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. That actually depends whether you're thinking of changing paths completely. Like for example, in my case, you know, the postdoc was probably the limit. I don't think I could have worked as a physicist for an extra 5 years and then go into finance, because even then I was told, you know, you've done a postdoc, you're so academic, you don't have, you know, finance experience and so on. But, you know, yesterday I was interviewing someone for a role, and I'm actually looking for someone who does not necessarily have finance experience. And this person just finished his PhD last year. And in my view, he's absolutely perfect because, you know, he can do the modeling, he can do the coding, and the finance bit he can just learn on the job. But I don't have the time to teach someone how to code, how to think. And these are skills that you're just never going to pick up on the job. So I think, yes, there is a limit depending on what you want to do. If you want to change careers completely, you probably have to think about this. Really, if you stay in the same field, probably doesn't matter as much, but probably something to keep in mind.
Just following up on the comment of like universities becoming more like corporate, how do you guys feel like the gap between working at a university versus working at a company, like day to day, like is doing the job, like is it same, or like what are the major differences between the two environments? Like, because it's kind of like we talk about like academia and industry as these like separate entities, but like how different are they actually?
I think someone described it this morning as universities being tied to the ARC maypole. And this image of, you know, you just being running around the maypole, it's completely different, right? It is completely different. Industry is, the research I do in industry now is far better than the research I was doing at CSIRO and at universities, right? So it's better supported, I've got better resources, you have really big projects with commercial outcomes aligned with them. Whereas universities, you're really tied to that one mechanism, right? It's the definition of an insanity that everyone tells us that we're not very good at commercialisation, but the funding's pretty much been the same for 40 years, right? So it's not going to change. So I think it's completely different. It's way better.
So I have a lot of friends who have done a career transition, but they've moved from the research side of the university to sort of the technical services side of the university, right? So instead of doing the research, they're writing the code to help researchers do the research, or they're in science IT, or they're helping build up the high performance computing within the university. And even then you can see, even though you're at a university, it's very different from a job project stability standpoint, but you still get the university politics with it. And that actually is a very good stepping stone to moving from like academia to sort of supporting academia to sort of going into industry. So I know some people who've moved from that to IT consulting, right, as well. And I guess in companies where we're doing research as well as doing it for industry, we still have cycles where you're trying to get to conferences, you're trying to submit to journals. If you're trying to work with the university, you're tied to the funding cycles of the university. So I'm like waiting for a grant. Like I've been constantly waiting for University of Melbourne to see if they can get a LEAF grant, for example. So that, there's different cycles at a company, but it feels more stable. I think that's the, like it might not be. Your job may change, and your company may decide to change areas, but because you can't see that happening, like obviously, you feel more stable. Yeah, okay. Does that make sense? Yeah. No. Yeah. So like Natalie and I have been like at IBM Research, we had ongoing jobs, but the research we were doing within our ongoing jobs changed every few years. Like, we didn't know that was going to happen, but it did change, and it was really confronting at the time. And that's very different from like a university change cycle, because you know you have to change because your grants run out. And you can see that coming, as opposed to your company deciding that, you know, quantum computing is super important now, we need more people on it.
The one difference I've noticed is that, and this is like a research job within a company, so it's kind of a bit closer to academia, but in academia I felt more alone. Like, I would write a paper, and if I was first author, then I'd do 95% of the work, and maybe it's different for you guys, but it wasn't as collaborative. Like, yes, we had a meeting every week and we discussed the ideas and we bounced the ideas around, but it was really one person driving it. I found that, because when it comes to publication, it's like that ties up, but I found that without worrying about that to start with, and just getting like, let's build something cool and let's collaborate, and then you can, if it turns out to be interesting and you write it up afterwards, it's sort of like an afterthought, which is kind of liberating, and has been a nice change. But clearly there's other commercial jobs where you're not doing research or building stuff, so it's a bit of a niche answer.
I was just going to say, like, further to that, I mean, the collaborative stuff within the business is much more fluid, but also the business-to-business collaboration, so working with other companies and other research teams is just way easier. There's no sort of competition or, you know, who's going to be the lead CI on that grant and get the funding and all that type of stuff. So, you know, I've been really surprised how quickly some of these collaborations and collaborative research can happen between businesses. And there's just a huge appetite for it, you know, leveraging off other people's expertise. So I think that's a big difference between industry and academia as well. And you don't have, you know, a university legal department messing everything up. It happens pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in my industry, like, so I went from research and going out in the field, and then going to industry, consultancy, and going out in the field and writing reports. So broadly speaking, it was similar. But in industry, you're ruled by policies, procedures, guidelines, legal documents, and they all have to be referenced, all have to be signed off, all have to be approved by the manager or the project director. And so the process of getting into the office is just different. And that was my experience of coming, like, you know, I would, for my experiments and going out in the field in my PhD, I would do everything myself. I'd go to Bunnings and I would make things, and then I would do the thing and it would be done, and I would write it up and it'd be cool. In industry, you, like, with my experience, like, I can still go to Bunnings and buy stuff and make things, but it's a whole other ball game. You have to get a guideline or a policy document to be able to know that you're making the right thing, and it has to be referenced, and it has to, you know, be signed off on and everything like that. That's just my experience anyway.
My question, I guess, was for most of you with the panel, in terms of that initial jump from when you leave, say, this environment to industry, in terms of how you identified the role you want to go for. So I think one of you mentioned in your talk, you just punched skills into Google and came up, and it kind of gave a role description, which I found quite interesting. Yeah, I think with you, Evelyn, quite interesting. But I guess my question is more broadly expanding upon that for the rest of you, I guess, and different methods in terms of identifying where you can find a role in your industry, or I guess from when you decide you want to make that jump to actually getting to that point of, well, where am I going specifically, and what role should I be looking for, and different ways to do that, I suppose.
I think it depends. Is there someone else? I can't see you over there. I think it depends on what you are looking for. When I was looking at my PhD, I thought sales, consulting, biotech. That's what I thought my options were. And that was what I was alluding to before, that industry can be this really broad thing. So thinking about what you enjoy the most, what doesn't take as much energy to make you do, that's where you start. And then a way to do that is to research your job almost, and find people in that industry and say, I want to have an interest interview. People are always really excited to talk about their stories, if you haven't already noticed, and essentially make it a research project to figure out what that next step is. You already know how to do that because you're a researcher. So then just applying it to your career.
I think also
and it's a funny because doing these types of things is interesting, right? It's useful for you because you kind of have to think about what you do. And that story about the dairy factory, and being exposed to that from a really young age. And when I think back, that's actually where my career's gone is what I want to do, which is build like a chemical industry in Australia, right? I mean, it's a massive objective and it's probably never going to happen. But, you've got to have, like, if you go, like, why have you done your PhD? What do you want to do? Like, what's your, if you think about what it is that the one thing that you fundamentally want to do, even if it's the craziest idea, and you make a decision, am I going to be able to do that through academia or am I going to be able to do that through industry? It begins to help solidify what you want to do. So I got to my natural limits at CSIRO, right? There's only so much, you can only take it so far, any of your technologies there. It will get to a natural limit. And so that's, for me, I was like, well, I want to take this further. I want to go global. How am I going to do that? I need to work with a company like Boron Molecular that can help me do that and achieve that big, massive, like, thing in the back of your mind, right? And it sounds crazy when I even think I sound crazy when I'm saying this, but I think that's part of it. Like, be true to yourself and what you want to achieve, and then go for it, right? It might take you 50 years to achieve it, but at least you will have, fulfilled. And as someone said, stay true to yourself, right? So stick to a role or stick to jobs that fulfill some objective that you want to do.
Yeah, what I want to add to that is it also depends on you personally. I mean, are you someone who just prefers to stay on their own and code all day, or do you like interacting with people? I think, coming from a science background, like I've sometimes I'd rather just spend the whole week on my own and code up stuff, really, rather than interacting with people. But obviously the nature of my job is such that I do interact with people a lot, sometimes a lot more than I would like to, but that's just the job. So one question I would ask myself is, can I see myself in a job where, I do not interact with people at all, or would I prefer a job where, I talk to people all day long? So I think that's a big part of it. And so when I finished my PhD, I was in that position where I was actually really sick of the fact that I could only talk about what I was doing to about 5 people in the world. And, as much as I like coding and doing stuff on my own time and that, I was just really missing sort of more interaction with people and talking about what I do on a daily basis and that sort of stuff. So I think research can be quite isolating in that respect. And it also comes down to, your work style and what you like to do, and find a job that suits that as well.
And just maybe a little bit of, I guess it's a bit pragmatic, use social media. So if you meet somebody who has a job that sounds interesting, stalk them on LinkedIn. Right?
So nowadays, because so many people, like the realization that not all PhDs and postdocs can continue into academia, there's actually a lot of resources out there for transitioning to industry that I know there wasn't about 10 years ago. So if you just look, like a lot of them aren't Australian based, which is like a bit of a problem locally, but there's a lot of information for US PhD students transitioning, at least in physics, outside physics. CERN created an alumni network 2 years ago, where people talk about the jobs they've had post-particle physics. There's actually a program in the US where they take postdocs and PhD students and put them through like a 6-week little training course where they start, which is sponsored by companies, and then they hack themselves up a little app and they pitch that at the end of it, and then the companies then see if they want to hire those PhDs at the end. So there's lots of little programs and websites out there that have this information. So there's one where one of my friends said, I told my friends about this, and they're like, oh, I use this website called Cheeky Scientist, where you sign up, and it's for PhD students who are looking to go into industry. So they have all of these resources about CVs and interviewing and different types of industries and jobs. And like all of this stuff did not exist when I was looking to leave academia. So there's a lot of stuff out there that, use your Google foo, you'll find stuff.
This is getting into practicalities, right, on how to do stuff. I think the stalking on social media, I was a very early adopter of LinkedIn. And so what I did when I came back from the US, because my wife had a job and I had no job, so I had to find one. So I basically just listed all the biotech and startup companies in Australia. I stalked them. I looked for, I sent that to my immediate network. Someone said your immediate network, right? And then you say, do you know anyone that works in these companies, right? So then you stalk like through that, and literally was just writing to all the people that I had referrals from. So I could say, look, my professor said such and such. That's your inline, right? Because they're getting lots of emails and they ignore them. But if you've got that in through your network, and then just get feedback on it, right? I mean, that's if you want to work out how to jump, you've got to get out there and talk to people, and just putting your hand up and saying, I'm looking for a job. Unless you say that, no one's ever going to come and tap you on the shoulder and say, I've got a job for you. That's just not going to happen. So yeah, I think those practicalities of using your networks and stuff, and reaching out to people. But you've kind of got to do that. It's a research project, right? I had a Google Drive, and I basically had this spreadsheet with all the companies and all the targets that I was going after, and then basically work my way through it to basically get in the door, and got the Soro job in the end. So.
While we're on practicalities, so if anyone's thinking about applying for DECRAs and some other grants, so once you submit your PhD, the timer starts from then, but a lot of industry, if you go into an industry job, the timer actually pauses. So the way, it's a reverse answer to your question about, instead of, I was saying what jobs would help me get a grant if I wanted to come back afterwards. So instead of just what jobs would I be useful at, I'm kind of using it as a stepping stone, so that if I want to go back to research, I have all this free time that I can add to my grant applications. So please double check that. I'm not sure if it's changed, but I'm kind of riding on that pretty hard.
So every one of you have spoken about networking and how important it is to land your first job. But could you share some pointers that can be a good conversation starter, because you don't want to come across as being desperate and actually looking for a job, because that can be a little obnoxious, I feel. So what can be a good conversation starters?
I think it's fine to say that you're looking for a job. I think what's obnoxious is the people who talk to you and say, I want a job, and then they don't know what job they want. Or they just I want to work in a company, and you're like, you work for a company, I want to work with you. That's you get those people. It's more knowing what type of job you want, and knowing a little bit about the person you're talking to, and maybe not what they do, but the company they work for, and what you would be interested in that company. So it's sort of doing the research about yourself and doing the research about the person you're talking to. And then it's fine to start the conversation with, I'm interested in X, whatever X is between you and them.
I got poached twice by two people on LinkedIn, my former network. And one was well researched on what he wanted. He was quite articulate on what sort of passions and skills he had. And it was very clear in his message. And another one was the complete opposite. It was like, I want a job, I need a job. And his background wasn't even relevant for the job that he was asking me about. And I think that makes it really difficult to have a conversation, an honest conversation with someone that you're approaching if you haven't had a good idea about the industry and why you would be suitable to it, because you're basically think of it as like a business case. You've got a business case. They're going to invest in you, and you're going to invest in them. So it's a mutual beneficial thing. So having pointers of why I would be good and why you want me is like, just in broad terms. It doesn't have to be specific. It's like, I am the bomb, you want me. It doesn't have to be as clear as that, but just kind of having a good comprehensive understanding of yourself and what skills you can bring and why they might need that.
Yeah, another thing I want to mention is we're talking about networking like as a thing you would be doing just when you're looking at a job, but that's actually not the right thing to do. Networking is all the time. And you have to be very active. You meet new people in the industry, and it's actually even more important when you're not looking for a job. Keeping in touch with people, catching up with people, even if it's just a coffee. You discuss how things are going and what your interests are. And one day, they'll have an opportunity. They'll tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you know what? We've got this, opportunity at our company. Would you be interested in applying? And as I've, gone through the last few years of my career and I've built my network more and more, so I've had these conversations more and more with people in my network that I catch up with regularly for different purposes, not necessarily because I'm looking for a job or, I've heard there's an opportunity, but just because I catch up with people and then sometimes they tap me on the shoulder and say, this is coming up, just letting you know. So I think that's also very important to be active all the time, not just when you're looking for a job.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, if you're asking someone for a job, it's too late, right? You've missed the point of networking. I didn't talk about it, but, I've done a lot of stuff like volunteered on committees, done scouts. The reason that I did that is I needed to learn to talk to normal people, right? Because I live in the academic bubble conversation world, and, you can talk about to about 5 people in the world about what you're actually doing, right? So you've got to learn to just talk to people, right? And that's what networking is. I used to try and go in and go, I'm going to talk to everybody today. I'm going to get like 1 million business cards, right? Now, if I'm at a conference, I try and talk to one person and really get to know that one person. If you can get like on a personal level, have a great conversation with one person, that's a really great networking outcome, right? If you've got like kind of a 30-second conversation with 10 people, they're never going to remember you, right? So I've sort of changed the way that I do my networking. You try and engage more deeply with fewer people rather than try and scattergun. And that one person is the most important person in the room, right? They may just be a low-level nobody, right? But they will remember you because you had a great conversation with them.
If you're a shy person and it doesn't come naturally to you, particularly asking somebody for a job, but I do agree with Oliver, if you're asking somebody, it might be a bit late. But ask them how you get involved. So, that sounds really interesting. How would I get involved in a project like that or in that? And it's just a different segue into a broader conversation. They say, oh, well, my friend, Jimbo's got an opportunity. Or,
I mean, you want to, get them talking as much as possible. So just actually actively showing an interest in someone else's research. You know what it's like, right? You're trying to sell your research to somebody and no one cares. If someone actually comes to you and says, hey, can you tell me about your research? Man, you're not going to shut me up. I'm going to talk to you all day, right? And that's so getting people to talk rather than you talking is a good way, especially if you're shy, right? Just say, oh, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more about that? That's a great way to do it.
So I was curious about sort of project timescales. So I worked in a startup for a short amount of time, and they were kind of like, we need a quantum computer yesterday was kind of their timescale. Whereas research is a bit more of a open-ended thing. You have to invent a process, investigate it before you get there. So how does the funding models work? This is more of a commercialization question maybe, but how do the funding models work when you're working in industry for some of these open-ended research questions, and particularly the timescales?
So like let's say like a COE, like a Centre for Excellence, right? That's 7-year grant, well, 5+2 grant within a university system. They don't just give you that money and like go away, right? You have to do your yearly updates and you have milestones every year. And it's similar in industry, right? You have a long-term goal, but you have specific measurable milestones as you're going. And that's I guess that's the same. It's just that you don't know, your Centre of Excellence is going to end in 5+2, whereas you don't know what happens if you maybe don't make those milestones, or if you will continue getting that funding for that particular project.
I think it depends on the project and where you are. I mean, your timelines might be different to your timelines, might be different to my timelines, and I think it's just adapting and knowing what those timelines are for your particular project and asking for a timeline. Because sometimes, it's that communication piece. I need this thing by next week or else. No. But what I've learned is timelines can vary. And a lot of the time, actually what people, when they say a timeline, they're not asking for outcomes, they're asking for progress. And that's an assessment of how well you're going, because then they will invest in the project again if you can demonstrate progress. If you can't demonstrate progress, then maybe timelines will be changing. And we've seen this with us. Like if you can't demonstrate progress, or even if you can, it just depends on where the industry's going. So timelines are important, but also demonstrating movement, because that might then change somebody's decision.
Yeah, I don't think that there's that much real blue sky research done in Australia anymore. There's a little bit, right? And some people might be able to get away with it. But everything's pretty structured these days, right? I mean, you know, even with an ARC grant and those types of things, you've got very clear objectives of what you're going to do. It may be that you're going after a problem, but it's not like you're just turning up every day and going, oh, I'm just going to ponder the nature of the universe. That unfortunately, in my view, has gone away. So
if you don't know what you want to do, you don't know how long it's going to take necessarily.
Right.
That's like...
Right. Yeah, like I think, yeah, right, yeah. No, I think it's similar. I think it's similar.
Yeah, so my research is pretty applied, but I've quarterly targets. So we've got a roadmap. We know where we want to be, what the end product is, but it's evaluated against what I said I'd do in the quarter, what the team said agreed we would try and do, and if we don't do that, we go through a process where we have a bit of a retrospective and you try and work out why you didn't do it. And if it's fixable, you proceed. And if it's not fixable, you stop doing that, right? So it's a process of constant evaluation, in my case, quarterly, working towards a roadmap of where your ultimate goal is.
Yeah, and I think it depends a lot on the environment you land in. Like where I work, it's pretty much, everything was due last week or 2 weeks ago or something. So, and it's I found myself once in a situation where I had a manager come to me and they had a model, and it was broken. And basically he said to me, "I've got 1 hour to get it fixed. Fix it." And I said, "I can't do that." So it really depends on your environment. If you're in an environment that is understanding of what research means, sometimes research means that you tried something and it didn't work, but that's still a result. It didn't work because it was not a good idea, but it was tried and you have some result. It didn't work. So it really depends on that, and that's also industry dependent, I found.
I might just add to that too, because I think that was the biggest shock to my system when I moved from, say, CSIRO and working on a project that went for my entire contract into private environmental consulting and jumping into projects that could be done in 3 days or a week. And yeah, it just depends really. Or then we had other projects that would go for years if they were a big infrastructure project. But it was learning to work with clients. That was what I really had to upskill in, and yeah, keeping that communication open, and yeah, if things are running late, yeah, talking to the clients, and yeah, demonstrating that progress, which I think's been mentioned a few times. But yeah, was a big shock going from multi-year projects to just even a handful of days. But on the other hand, that could be very satisfying because you would get through a lot and feel like you're making a lot of progress.
Yeah, just bouncing off the comment earlier by you about the DECRA. I just had a question. So for ECR's post PhD, the DECRA of course is the golden or perceived to be the golden ticket or opportunity to make it in academia, or at least make a start in academia, because it provides that initial funding. But 50% of that DECRA success is determined by your track record, right? By the hard currency of publications, first author, high impact factor, corresponding author, that sort of thing. And I just wonder whether the panel would be able to comment on being in a position as an academic or as a postdoc where you have built a track record to continue in academia, to really make a go of it, but then actually seeing industry as providing a real alternative or something that really is worth pivoting over into something completely different, yeah, rather than research and academia versus pivoting towards a industry position.
Yeah, I guess it's a personal choice, like, right? If you're going to have a crack at academia and that's an option, then go for it. But I think in Australia, we're lucky that as I was saying, you can kind of pause and go back, and the track record is, you're not throwing away the track record. Which I found liberating when I first heard that, because I was thinking, although my track record wasn't like super hard or anything, it was still just like had some momentum, had something going. So when I found that you could kind of pause it and then go back, then that was liberating to know. I'm not sure if that answers.
So one of the things that I like to think about when making these sort of bigger decisions about, what is a transition, is what would, 90 or 100-year Anna, if I get to that stage, what would she regret if I went one way or another at this choice? And that sometimes that crystallized the choice for me straight away. Like during my PhD, I was like, I'm not going to do this postdoc business. Going to get out of here, get a computing job like everybody else. They're all making money and enjoying their dinners. But I was like, that's, at the time, the LHC hadn't turned on yet, and that was the only time I'd be able to do a particle physics PhD at CERN because I had all the networks and the people, and I was like, my partner, the other people in industry were like, you can go to industry anytime. Like, this is the only time you'll be able to do this postdoc now and be part of that. That group and that collaboration.
I actually disagree with that. I have a friend who did his PhD in physics as well. But that was actually after, having spent some time working for Accenture, so for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. So he did his master's in physics and then decided he was going to give a crack going to the industry. And then he realized that he was just not made for it. And then he decided, okay, well, I'm just going to go back to academia. So it can happen.
Yeah. But I was like, for you at the time, like it's one of those, you have to be happy with the choice that you make at the time. Right? Like just when you make it. You can't be like, I'm going to go to industry and every 3 months go, oh, I should have been academia, right? Once you've made a choice as well, you need to put yourself into it to enjoy it and to make the most of the decisions you've made as well.
Are you guys saying that you're worried that if you do jump and you've built up this great career, that all this track record, that you're worried that you'd lose momentum on that? Is that what you say? Yeah. And I think, there's this sense that that as soon as you go to industry, you're going to stop all your academic activities, right? And what I've tried to do is I've maintained all my linkages with all my collaborators. I've got more collaborations with Deakin and other universities and stuff, right? So I've really tried to maintain like a publication pipeline through that, right? Because that's important for the business and important for my career as well. So it doesn't mean you just have to stop everything, right? And if you're going to go into industry, then it's going to be aligned with something you're interested in anyway. So, your employer would be, I'm guaranteed would be very supportive of you continuing to have a high profile in terms of publications and stuff like that. And you guys at IBM would be across that as well, right? So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So, like, every stage of my academia, like, even my undergrad, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to continue with this academic thing. And then I did honours, and then I did a PhD, and I was like, well, what's next? So it's not, and I agree with what people have said on the panel, like, it's, you're using that, everything that you've got to at that point for what you're going to do in the future, whether that is the exact subject matter or the papers or anything like that, or is it transferable skills. It's always going to, or hopefully, be a backup to what you're doing. Like, it's always going to provide that background, and it's always going to be a plus. I think it is sometimes, like, my PhD supervisor is a similar story to what you said, that he went into industry and was like, nah, and went back into academia. And that's fine too. Like, it's all learning. And I agree that, you just try and, as much as possible, be happy with what you're choosing at the time. Like, the no regrets and figuring out, okay, so if I went down this path or this path, what would potentially suit me now and in the future. I ended up doing a PhD because I did my honours linked with CSIRO, and I said I really like CSIRO. Unfortunately, that was when their funding was starting to be cut. And they told me, basically, if you want to do a research career, not having a PhD will stop you because you need it to be the head of a lab or be the first author. And that's one reason, other than a couple of other reasons, why I did a PhD, because I didn't want it to stop me. And in the end, it was a great decision because not just because it didn't stop me, but also it taught me a lot of things that are now relevant to my job.
It's not a binary choice either. There's shades of grey. So you can get on the other side of the linkage grant, right, if your company has the means. And a lot of universities use industry supervisors for research students. That's also a good way to keep your hand in, so you can be in industry and still involved in research in a university setting through all of those mechanisms, and all of them at the same time. So it's not necessarily a binary choice.
Great. Okay, so maybe we can continue this discussion in the mixer afterwards. If you'd all join me once again in just thanking our panellists for making it here today.